Shapes in 3ds Max can consist of two or more individual shapes that are combined together. Those shapes, if positioned one inside the other, create what Max refers to as a nested shape. Nesting creating holes or negative space inside an object once it's been converted to 3D. This video will show you how nesting one shape inside another can be accomplished. Now, before we actually look at the nesting process, let's first check out what usually happens when a 2D shape in Max is created. Having my front viewport working full screen, I'll go to the Create tab and activate the Shapes button. Let's now create a rectangle starting in the upper left-hand area of the view, drawing diagonally to the lower right. Once the rectangle's been drawn, I'll activate the Ellipse command, making the ellipse inside the rectangle. Once created, if I right-click to cancel the command, then click Away, notice that we have two different wireframe colors. And this is exactly what we would expect, having two different shapes being created inside our view. Typing H to activate the Select by Name list, you'll notice two different entries inside the dialog, one for the ellipse and one for the rectangle. And that's what we typically expect. Each time we create a shape, we're creating a brand new individual 2D shape. But that doesn't have to be the case. You can actually combine shapes together, creating two or more shapes within a shape. You do that using a special command called Start New Shape. Let's take a look at how that works. We'll window select both our rectangle and our ellipse, then hit Delete. Okay, let's begin by simply repeating the process of creating the rectangle. Again, I'll draw that starting from the upper left, going down to the lower right-hand corner of my view. Now, here's how we can actually add our next shape into the original rectangle. Directly above the rectangle button in the Create column, notice a longer button that's also on. That button being named Start New Shape. If we uncheck the Start New Shape option, the next shape we make will be included with the original rectangle. Let's try that. We'll uncheck the Start New Shape option, and we'll draw an ellipse inside our rectangle. Watch the difference now if we cancel out of the ellipse command, then deselect the two shapes in our scene. Notice this time we're left with a single wireframe color as opposed to the original two that we got the first time around. If we click on either of the two lines, you'll notice they both select. We've basically created now one shape consisting of two individual splines. Heading to the Select by Name list by typing H, note this time around we're left with a single name. That name being the title of the original shape that we first created. What we've basically done by combining both shapes together is nest one shape inside the other. That nesting, once the shape has been made into 3D, will basically create a hole inside the object that we create. It's pretty cool how it works. Now, even though we haven't specifically looked at using Max's 3D modeling commands yet, something that we'll do in detail in an upcoming chapter, let's at least throw a modeling command into the mix real quick so we can see the result of this nesting process. We'll start by taking our viewports back to 4-way, hitting the Alt-W keyboard shortcut. To center what we've created in all four views, let's now hit Shift-Alt-Z. Okay, for the next step, just follow along. In the command panel, we'll open up the Modify column. Directly under the name Rectangle 001, notice the entry called Modifier List. To the right of that, you'll see a black arrow pointing down. Go ahead and click on that. In the list that opens, the entries being categorized in alphabetical order, drop down to the E's, selecting Extrude. Extruding is one of the primary modeling techniques in Max, which as mentioned we'll be discussing in detail coming up shortly. For now, I simply want you to take note that the nested inside ellipse has created an opening or bored out space inside the object. In essence, creating a hole inside our 3D geometry. And with this nesting technique, it really doesn't matter what shape of shapes you end up using. Nesting one shape inside the other will always create an opening. Let's try that again. Let's first delete our 3D object, then this time around we'll do the exact opposite, nesting a rectangle inside an ellipse. Leaving our interface configured to 4 views, let's activate the front view, then head back to our shape commands. Starting out, we'll draw an ellipse from the upper left to the lower right-hand corner in that viewport. Now remember, the important thing to create the nest is to now turn off the Start New Shape command. With that off and staying in our front view, let's now draw a smaller rectangle inside the ellipse. Once in place, we'll go back to the Modify column, enter the modifier list, and again click on the name Extrude. The nesting of the rectangle inside the ellipse has again created a hole. Let's activate the perspective view. We'll orbit around using the Alt-middle mouse wheel combo so we can inspect things closer. So there you go with the technique of nesting shapes. Now, as a side note, there's actually another technique that you can use to combine separately made shapes together after the fact. In other words, once they've already been created as separate 2D shapes. We'll hold off on discussing that technique, though, until we get a little further into the title where we'll have a better foothold on the software. For now, though, just know that combining individually created shapes together involves a process or command known as attaching. Look for that coming up a little later on in the title.